Good evening, I'm Mike Knetter, and welcome to the UW Now live stream, where we convene experts from the Badger community to discuss timely and important topics. Tonight, we will be discussing avian influenza, known to regular folks like me as bird flu. Some key questions we'll discuss: the current state of the outbreak across the country and around the world, what it means that the virus has spread from birds to cows and now to humans, and whether we should be concerned about a new pandemic. Our experts have significant experience with previous and current outbreaks of bird flu. Darlene Konkle is Wisconsin's state veterinarian and has been with the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection since 2005. She's served as the state's chief animal health official since 2018 and has led responses to outbreaks of avian influenza and bovine tuberculosis. She is a Wisconsin native and has both a master's and a doctorate from the veterinary medicine program at UW-Madison. John Lucey is the director of the UW Center for Dairy Research and the Owen R. Fenema Professor in Food Chemistry. He has over 20 years of research experience with expertise in the processing and chemistry of dairy foods, and is credited with the invention of Dubliner cheese in 1990. He joined the faculty at UW-Madison in 1999 and has a doctorate in food chemistry from University College Cork in Ireland. Keith Poulsen is the director of the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, whose research focuses on infectious and zoonotic diseases currently creating problems around the world. Also a Wisconsin native, Poulsen is a three-time Badger with a bachelor's degree in biochem, a doctorate in veterinary medicine, and a doctorate in comparative biomedical sciences, all from UW-Madison. What a great panel tonight. I thank you all for taking time out of your Tuesday evening to share your knowledge and insights with our audience. We're going to begin tonight with Darlene, who can share more with us about the current status of bird flu in Wisconsin and what the state is doing about it. Darlene, thanks for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Good evening, everyone. I'll just give kind of a brief overview of the current state of highly pathogenic avian influenza in the U.S., how we think it got here, and a little bit about recent events with the detections in dairy cattle. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Since very early 2022, we've been dealing with an H5N1 highly pathogenic avian influenza virus in the United States. It made its way to North America from Europe in late 2021 and started circulating in wild waterfowl populations along the East Coast, primarily at first. Highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses get their name by how they behave in poultry. So this particular virus has deadly effects in poultry. It causes high mortality, what we call high morbidity. So lots of sick birds, and it transmits very readily from bird to bird in large poultry flocks. And since 2022, the United States has had numerous detections in poultry in over 800 flocks, and in virtually every state except Louisiana. There have also been numerous detections in wild birds, not only waterfowl, but other species of birds as well. Wisconsin has had cases as well. In 2022, we had 29 cases of H5N1, highly pathogenic avian influenza, and both commercial and backyard flocks in Wisconsin. And to date in poultry, it's been the most expensive animal disease outbreak in U.S. history. Go ahead, go to the next slide. And along the way, this virus has ebbed and flowed a little bit as it's been circulating in wild waterfowl and as it's been detected in poultry. So this is called an epi-curve, or an epidemiological curve. This slide is from USDA, and it traces the course of the high-path H5N1 virus through poultry flocks from the beginning. I realize you can't read the bottom numbers so well, but on your left-hand lower left side is basically the beginning of the year in 2022, and on your lower right is the current date today. And that big peak on the left side is the spring and early summer of 2022, when we saw quite a few detections across the United States in both poultry and in non-poultry. The non-poultry are basically backyard flocks, people that keep chickens or turkeys or other poultry for their own use. Then in the summertime months, that's the low point on the left-hand side of your screen, followed by a lower, broader number of cases in the fall and winter of 2022, 2023. And the beginning of spring 2023, we didn't see so much. That's when you're seeing very few cases there, about 60% of the way through. And then last fall, in the fall of 2023, we saw another bump in cases. And you can see these bumps in the United States correspond with fall and spring migration. Usually we see larger numbers of cases because we see more virus moving through when the wild waterfowl move through. Next slide. Along the way in 2022, this virus showed the capability to infect mammals as well. And this is another slide from USDA. Some of this initial work was done at the UW in the School of Veterinary Medicine and in the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Some Wisconsin rehabilitators noticed unusual deaths in wild red foxes and submitted those foxes for necropsy at the lab. And they were able to isolate the H5N1 avian influenza virus from these foxes. And since that time, it's been detected in a number of other mammal species, mostly mammals that either scavenge on carcasses or that prey upon wild birds, including raccoons, but we've also seen cases in seals, in bears, and you're seeing a map of the United States, but there have also been cases in mammals throughout North and South America as well. Go ahead to the next slide. And then in March of 2024, the virus kind of opened a new chapter for us, and it was detected in dairy cattle from herds in Texas and Kansas. That was a bit unexpected for us. We've all been watching this virus very closely, and I cannot profess to be a virologist, but we knew the virus could infect mammals. People are obviously mammals as well, so there was some concern about, will this virus develop the capability to spread mammal to mammal? And to date, we have not seen very many cases in humans. There have been 3 cases of the virus in people associated with the dairy herds across the country. CDC still considers the risk to people to be very low, but virologists are watching this virus very closely. And it was not an expected event to see it jump to dairy cattle. So since March, when we saw the detections in the initial herds in Texas and Kansas, we've had detections in a total of 12 states. You can see them shaded in red on the map, and there have been over 100 dairy herds affected. The good news for dairy herds, if there is good news, is the virus is much milder in dairy cattle as far as the clinical course than it is in poultry. These cattle, for the most part, survive. They lose milk production. They have a drop in feed intake. In some cases, they have fevers. They obviously don't feel well for a time, but they, for the most part, recover. And herds that have in affected states are allowed time to recover. And for the most part, states are restricting movement of at least those lactating cattle until the virus is able to run its course. I mentioned the 3 human cases, so that's obviously a concern that the virus has shown it can infect people. But again, we're not seeing that to a high degree, and we're not seeing it transmit person to person, at least yet. What we are seeing, and USDA has shared some of their data on the affected dairy herds in these 12 states, and those individual states are working together as well to share information since March. And we've got some epidemiological data to look at now based on questionnaires with these farmers and the whole genome sequencing, which tells us more about the genome of the virus and how it may be mutating. So the initial event appeared to be a spillover from wild birds into these cattle herds. And from there, it has spread from herd to herd by movement of cattle, at least at first, and then in some cases through other means. We don't necessarily have the full picture yet, but some combination of movement of people, vehicles, equipment, other things acting as fomites might be allowing this virus to spread herd to herd. So we're very interested in upping biosecurity to contain this virus. Our overall goal is to try to keep it from circulating widely and not give it a chance to mutate. You can go ahead to the next slide. The one thing I want to highlight here as well is this virus, and the response to it is really a relevant example and a good example of One Health in action. And One Health is the interaction of human health, animal health, and also interaction with our shared environment. So we know this virus affects both wild and domestic animals. It can also affect wildlife, and it has the ability to infect people as well, at least to some degree. In Wisconsin, we've been responding by watching this virus very closely. You can see from the map, we have not had any cases in dairy cattle to date, and our last detection in poultry flocks was at the very beginning of 2024. We recently put into place an order that requires testing of lactating cattle prior to movement in Wisconsin to a fair or exhibition where these animals could commingle with others from other herds. And that's in an effort to stop spread and ensure that cattle that are going to those events at least have a negative test within 7 days. So with that, I'll turn it back to our hosts and move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. That was a great way to kick us off. And following you will be a close collaborator. Keith Poulsen is the director of the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. And Keith is going to tell us a bit about what he's seeing in terms of the virus as well. So Keith, take it away.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to get on with some fellow Badgers and talk about interesting things that we find in the field. I have a joint appointment at the School of Veterinary Medicine and Large Animal Internal Medicine, and then spend most of my time at the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. About half of what we do is we test for export of bovine genetics, and then we also are helping our dairy producers and veterinarians out in the field diagnose new diseases. We also have a large poultry component. And then again, I can never forget about CWD. That is growing by leaps and bounds every year around the country. So if we could go ahead to our first slide, here's our business model at the Diagnostic Lab. We're kind of a hybrid fee-for-service state agency. So we do get about 30% of our funding is through taxpayer dollars, and that's for salary, and the rest of it comes from a little bit from grants here and there, but most of it is our fee-for-service. So the consumers on that lower left-hand side, that's everyone in the audience. Mainly we work with veterinarians and especially our state animal health official, Dr. Konkle, and then agribusiness, specifically genetics, mainly genetics, and then our dairy producers. But then we also, working off of the One Health Venn diagram that Darlene showed, is that animal health and public health are all kind of tightly linked here. We do that with multiple collaborators, whether it's through government advocacy at the state or the federal level, our USDA and DACCAP partners, and even our global partners and our accreditation. And how the whole thing works and why is WVDL a level 1 national animal health laboratory network lab is because of our blockchain that's built by our quality and accreditation system. Veterinary diagnostics are not required to be accredited, similar to human diagnostics, which you might see in your doctor's office called CLIA or CAP. We don't have that for animals. So not most veterinary diagnostic labs are not accredited. But that quality blockchain really allows us to do high throughput diagnostic testing to help and preserve and improve and sustain animal health, public health, to really support veterinarians in Wisconsin's agribusiness economy. We also have some research and development. We do make some products, some medias that we send around the country. And then we have 3 client services veterinarians along with our complement of 7 pathologists to help interpret some of those cases. And we can't do what we do without the people that you see in that picture. It's Katie Reed, Mark Tripalt, and Jared Van Thiel. So go ahead and the next slide, please. So what do I mean by the NAL network? And you'll hear me say NAL, National Animal Health Laboratory Network. There are 66 labs, and there are 37 level 1 labs. Wisconsin is one of the flagship level 1 labs. You'll see 2 in Madison, soon to be 3. The second one right now is an affiliate lab. It's the National Wildlife Health Center on the west side of Madison. And we'll also have a Nuln facility in Barron. We have a facility in Barron that is going under major renovation and remodeling for biosafety reasons. And so that will be a Nuln lab as well, really primarily to serve the poultry industry in the northwest part of the state. The key part here on Nuln is that everyone is proficiency tested on the same protocols, uses the same approved equipment and reagents. So if California were to get into trouble, or Wisconsin, then other labs can help us out with our sample load. So it's funded through USDA, a little bit through Farm Bill, and a little bit through our federal budget. Go ahead to the next one. So this is our H5N1 avian influenza cases up until 2022. So the end of 2022. It's kind of important because you could see how widespread this virus is. And there's a big component of, well, how do we call ourselves disease-free if this is something that's spread in wild birds, like what Dr. Konkle was talking about? And then we're seeing multiple cases all over, and including mammals. And mammals were relatively new for this particular map. So, but when you look at the next slide, this, which Dr. Konkle also showed, are actually the up to 40 different mammalian species since 2022. So we've seen this, how it's still considered widespread. And it's important to note, and some of the questions that might come up of why don't we vaccinate, or why don't we do other things? There's a lot of the reasons why different species have different disease control is all dependent on our international trade status, what the purpose of the vaccine is, what the cost would be, and then what our ultimate goal is. So as you can see here, we have multiple different species affected. Go ahead to the next slide. So this was in April of when we had our first 9 cases, right? We saw this. If you could click first, we'll see some arrows. Now, why do we have these particular states? And why do we grow calves in that Texas Panhandle, New Mexico, Kansas, Colorado? It's because it's hot and dry. Hot and dry calves do really, really well. And this is a business model that it's about 9% of the entire dairy industry in terms of cow numbers, although it's a very large component of milk. And where they grow calves, calve them out, and then push them into a northern states where there's less heat stress, so the cows actually do better. And this is all done in the name of efficiency. Very similar to probably the car that's parked in your garage, where the transmission might be made in Japan, the battery could be made in China, or and then the engine maybe somewhere else, and then it's assembled in North Carolina. You know, just like my Honda was assembled in Kentucky, but are parts from all over the world. So this is a model here. Now, if we click one more, Wisconsin is a little bit different because we certainly do send our calves down to the high plains desert because it's hot and dry. Calves in the fall and spring do very poorly when the little babies, because of the variable temperature swings. Remember, this February was 70 degrees, and we had 8 inches of snow in April. That's really hard on calves when they live outside. But we tend not to move them back as lactating animals. All the yellow arrows are movement of cattle that are actually lactating, because instead of having a farm that is a master of all trades or jack of all trades, master of none, they specialize and have dairies that all they do is milk cows. So that was one of the big reasons why Wisconsin has been spared up to this point. But now this particular dairy model really isn't our number one reason. We're starting to see blooms. And remember what Dr. Konkle said about, well, could it be vehicles or people or poor biosecurity, or is there a rodent issue or other wildlife? So there's a lot of data that we still have yet to understand. Can you go ahead to the next slide? Here's our current outbreak, and you can see Wisconsin's kind of sandwiched in there. Iowa's releasing a few. The purpose of why I wanted to repeat this slide is that different disease control surveillance programs have been really dependent on the state and what is the largest industry in their state. Michigan has been very proactive. They always have been. But their dairy industry has been very used to dealing with tuberculosis because of the reservoir and wild white-tailed deer. And then they've also been part of the large dairy model. And then they're starting to see bloom from people that are living together, or there's similar people working on multiple farms. But then I want to compare and contrast that to Iowa. So Iowa is doing that as well. They're drawing control zones around their domestic poultry flocks, and they found 2 more farms. I think it was either today or yesterday, because they're doing that surveillance. But they're doing that because of poultry is a much larger industry, and they want to make sure that they can maintain their poultry and swine industry. So you have to remember too, this isn't just birds and cows. This is all of our domestic livestock put together. So if we go to the next slide. I think this is really, really exciting data. It's not mine, but I have Drew and Jason said that certainly I could share it. I'm sure they'll publish it soon from Iowa and Colorado. Jason is looking at a bunch of different farms. I probably should get moving here. But if you look at our PCR value, and PCR is kind of counterintuitive, the lower the CT value, so as that dips, the more virus or RNA that's in that milk. So if you can see this at the start of clinical signs at day 0 for a herd, their bulk tank will be PCR positive right around 2 weeks before they see that. Now, so those cows they look clinically normal, their milk looks normal. And when they start to see clinical signs, their somatic cell count will rise only for a few days. And then it goes back to normal. That's when we see the milk drop. We also see milk that turns kind of yellow, colostrum-y, and it kind of has a thicker viscosity. Now, the bottom one, I was playing with my Apple Pencil here. That's why it's weird colors. Those are detectable antibodies. So antibodies are the body's immune response to pathogens. And you'll notice that we're starting to see antibody positive cows between 0 and 7 days. And we think that's because they've been affected for at least a couple of weeks, because it does take several weeks for antibodies to come up. Now, you can see where those lines cross. Now, I completely freehanded that, if you can't tell. But we also, I think, when we get some more information, and we repeat this more, that might be a sweet spot to understand what actual risk is, because those antibodies are binding virus in milk. So that's a good sign. And antibody positive is a good sign if you have PCR negative milk, especially. Let's go to the next one. I can finish up here. So what do we need, and where have the boundaries been? There's just like any disease. And if anyone remembers that darn pandemic of 2020, is that there is always a junction between political science and animal science and public health, right? So we always have to maintain that there's a lot of politics, especially in election year. And then there's an economic component. And then there's a public health side as well. I do think that some of the gaps here are we need to be bringing industry and government at the same table, instead of dictating down policies and or programs that may or may not be relevant for industry, or industry digging their heels in and not participating at all. That's a problem. And we know that even direction or treating clinical patients or managing clinical diseases, diagnostics represent typically less than 5% of those costs, but they direct over 70% of our clinical decisions, whether that's managing an outbreak or managing a single patient. If we don't have the diagnostics, which we do not have right now in large numbers, that's our ongoing, it's be really hard to make those decisions. Unfortunately, we can't get those diagnostics because of some of the limitations from our industry participation. What does industry need in order to participate? They need relevant indemnity programs. The indemnity programs now are a great step forward. I think they need to be tweaked because they're not working. Ever since July 3rd, we have had 0 farms sign up. There are 16 states that are interested, but no farms or states have signed up. We need clear regulations about how we get out of quarantine. We know that we're going to find positive cows, and industry needs to know what that means. That's really hard to do. And I know Dr. Konkle and I talk about this on a regular basis, is that we can't have a cookie cutter, one size fits all. So we have to think about what will be in between. And we need to maintain our market access for milk, whether that's domestic or international, which is about 40% of our milk supply is international. What about public and animal health? We need industry to work with us. We need industry to collaborate, and I see that from both sides of the coin. And we need to stop this spread of virus in cattle so we don't reach an endemic state. As we know that cows don't have a very long immune response, neither do people, to influenza. So we don't want to continue movement of this virus because it will be exposed to naive populations, and we'll continue virus into endemicity. And the longer that we have virus going in between herds, the higher that chance of continued spillover, be it our mesocarnivore mammals in the environment, or even our marine or terrestrial animals, or people, right? We've seen that in people. It could get much worse if there was significant viral changes. So with that, you got to talk to your veterinarians. That's a group of us at World Dairy Expo taking care of the cows. And that's Rod Clark, who manages, he's doing some automated high throughput PCR testing there. We can go to the next one. Okay, so with that, any questions? I'd love to take them after Dr. Lucey talks. This is when Bucky came to visit the WVDL. Trying to get Bucky through biosafety was pretty interesting. But anyway, he had a great time and he's learning all about the WVDL idea. Feel free to visit our website or email with any questions. Thanks, Mike.
Well, we'll be back with questions, Keith. And I know one of our listeners is concerned about whether the World Dairy Expo poses some risk of bringing some of this disease into the state. But next up, we've got John Lucey, who I want to thank for being here tonight. John is in Florida at a national conference for dairy science, and I believe is reporting that UW students have cleaned up on a lot of awards down there. So, John, great to have you with us, and look forward to your remarks as it may apply to the dairy industry specifically. So, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yes, I'm down here in Florida. It's hot and sticky down here, but our students in dairy foods just cleaned up the poster competition as well as the oral competition at this week's meeting. So congrats to all the Badgers who've done very well. So if we go to the first slide. So I'm a food scientist. So my background is more about the milk and worrying about what this does in cows. And a little bit about, as Mike introduced me, I am a professor of food science. I've been on the campus for 25 years, and I study milk and its properties and composition and cheese and things like that. And we, at our Center for Dairy Research that I lead, we do most of the training programs for training people on how to operate cheese plants, milk plants across the state. So they have to be licensed for those type of operations to make cheese. And they also, for making any kind of fluid milk products that you might drink, they have to be licensed to operate things like the pasteurizer and receive milk as well, so they can do it in a safe manner. We do the training, and then DATCAP does the actual formal licensing of it. So we probably bring in about 1,000 folks from industry a year to one of our training programs and short courses. So my focus is really to focus and talk about the milk, because we're talking about dairy cattle. And, Keith and other experts on our campus are really involved in the animal, the virus, the spread, and from a veterinary kind of point of view as well, and diagnostic point of view. So since this outbreak started, we have been in regular communication. I probably hear from Keith a couple of times a week about some question or asking him and providing some advice to himself and Yoshi that are studying the virus and its properties. So here, my kind of takeaway as a food scientist when I think about this topic and things that I bring top of mind. The first kind of thing to think about is that it seems to be that the milk or the mammary gland that the cow has a very high viral load. There is not, I'm not aware if it's fully proven yet, but one of the possibilities there, and Keith probably knows about it, is that there's likely a receptor in the mammary gland that really the virus likes and can replicate, and the numbers can be very high. So this is a very big concern then for lactating cows, because there will be virus in the milk. As mentioned already, the cows do get sick, but in contrast to most poultry and birds, there isn't a very high mortality rate, thankfully. but their milk production decreases and the milk properties become altered. And we mentioned a few of these already. There's a discoloration, thick, clotted. Interesting, one of the things we first did here, and we were talking about how to look at the properties of the milk that's coming from these cows once the first samples were able to be brought onto our campus, is that when we added the rennet enzyme, which is the rennet enzyme that's used to clot milk to make cheese, to this infected milk, these milks did not clot. They would not clot at all. So this milk is very messed up. It's altered in properties, and wouldn't go into the milk supply anyway, because this would be considered like infected cows and not proper milk to go into it, and it should be discarded. But as Keith's graph he showed there, what we know now is that cows have active virus or some viral load for maybe a week or two before the farmer will recognize them as being significantly sick. So the milk in that period, a week or two, probably was continued to be milked and probably went into the bulk tank. And so that is why I'll get to some data that came out of FDA. There has been some of this virus that has been going into milk before they recognized the cows had any symptoms. If you could forward to the next slide. So I want to talk about our safeguards, because to be frank, I grew up in a dairy farm, and dairy farms are not a sterile aseptic environment. The cows themselves are reservoirs for all kinds of bacteria and pathogens, and it's also in water, soil, manure, etc. So from our farm point of view and from the milks that we're producing from it, we already think about that there could be the possibility that there's some pathogen or bacteria in the milk that could cause a concern for us. And we've known that for over 150 years. Now, the good thing for us is that over 100 years ago, we created something between the states and federal government called the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance. We're celebrating that 100-year anniversary this year. And this is regulated by FDA, but there's a complicated arrangement between all the states, and I'll get to that point in a second. And it's regulated by something that's called the PMO, which is called the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance. And it's basically a whole book or document or monograph, whatever you want to call it, outlining all kinds of regulations about how milk has to be handled at the farm, the cleanliness, the sanitation, the design of the equipment. And it also talks about the key critical control steps for this raw milk to make sure there's no pathogens present in it, which is pasteurization. So pasteurization is a time and temperature combination. And you see here two of the most common ones used in the dairy industry. One is about 145 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. We call that batch, and it's often done by small plants or cheese plants that want to just, pasteurize maybe 100 gallons, and that's all they have to work with for the day, or 200 gallons. But in the larger plants, it's done by a continuous system, and I'll show you a simple diagram of that. And that's done at 161 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. Where did these temperatures and times come from? There was a lot of study more than 100 years ago trying to figure out what was the most likely and most heat stable pathogen, and then what was what temperature we needed to go to inactivate that pathogen. So we moved up the temperature and time to really kill off the most heat stable pathogen. So that's why there's a high degree of confidence and a high degree of food safety assurance in pasteurized milk. The one caveat to that is that there's a separation between the federal rules and the state rules. What that means for milk and pasteurization is that individual states can allow raw milk sales in various types of forms, from the farm or at a store. It can regulate within its state, but the federal or FDA is involved between the states. So if we go to the next slide. So this is the cover of the book of this Pasteurized Milk Ordinance, and it covers products that you see when you go to the store. It's called Grade A. Grade A products are fluid milk and things like yogurt. And it's a complicated dance for how that's regulated because of the fact that states have their own rights. So what it means is that the FDA, USDA, and the individual states, like Wisconsin, band together in a group that's called the National Conference in Interstate Milk Shippers. It's kind of a mouthful, but what that means is if in Wisconsin we have milk and it wants to go to Illinois, there needs to be some framework to make sure that we're all obeying the same kind of rules. And that's where they have the interstate shippers, people who want to transfer milk between states, all have to agree to the same kind of rules. And that's why the federal government gets involved in the rules. And then they can change the rules if they want to at a conference that's held on a routine basis. And they propose changes to this PMO process. If we go to the next slide. This is what a pasteurizer looks like in simple form. What it is that it's a heat exchanger. And in the colors in blue there, or the dark kind of color, that's cold milk that comes in on one side of a very thin, narrow plate, and on the other side is hot water. And what that means is there's a continuous flow of product that could be moving at 20 gallons per minute. It could be phenomenally fast, and they're huge. They're twice or three times the size of our cars. And these products can be pasteurized continuously as the cold milk comes in. On the other side of the plate is the hot water, and it's rapidly got up to temperature. I mentioned this because this is a very rapid process, and it's quickly reaching its temperature. It goes through a holding period, and then it goes off to the next side. If you go to the next slide. So when I come back to this, so pasteurization is our critical control point. But if we go and talk about this infected cows from this outbreak that we've had, one of the first signs was that cats on these infected farms got sick, and some of them died from drinking raw milk. Many farms will have cats around to keep rodents down. From a pasteurization point of view, we are really only at the state where Wisconsin, Cornell, and one overseas group has looked at whether pasteurization is effective against this virus. But so far, they indicate that pasteurization is effective, and I'll show you some data from that. But we're still waiting for a proof from the FDA, and they're doing the testing right now, where they will operate a pasteurizer that looks something like the system I talked about in the last slide, a continuous system which is designed to heat every drop of milk to the right required temperature. And they're actually doing that, I believe, in Athens, Georgia at the moment. So we're expecting any results any day. If you go to the next slide. So the first correspondence or publication came out of Yoshi's lab, primarily from people here at UW-Madison. They just released it not that long ago. And they had individual raw infected milk samples from Texas and Kansas, and they tested them on a very simple lab-based, actually PCR cycler that they had available to do some of the temperatures like I talked about that are used for pasteurization on the last slides. What they saw is that with their simple lab equipment, they could say that there was at least a 4-log reduction in virus, so a very significant reduction in virus, but they did see some replication or activation in inoculated cells. We don't know whether that is just due to the inadequacies of these very simple kind of lab testing, because there isn't a lot of mixing, and even if there's a little air bubble, it mightn't get heated. So we're really waiting to see how effective is it 5, 6, 7 log reduction. We won't know that number until the FDA does its proper pasteurization test. I expect it to come hopefully any week now. You go to the next slide. The FDA did put out some information in the last month or so, and it did some testing for retail milks across the U.S. Maybe that information wasn't, the right kind of information to reveal to the public, because they needed to explain, although you find and detect some genetic material from virus, it doesn't tell you if it's live or active. In fact, their subsequent testing on it show that all of it was inactivated, none of it was active virus. So the pasteurization step that I told you about was doing its job. Just like it is expected to do its job for any pathogen like Listeria, you will find dead DNA or RNA from that bacteria in the milk. The pasteurization just kills it, it doesn't take it out. What we also know is that virus numbers in raw milk, so some of the samples that Yoshi and some of the ones that Cornell have looked at, that virus stays high levels in raw milk if it's just held in the refrigerator for several weeks. So it doesn't drop off very quickly. The FDA has sent out messages, because it can't regulate within a state. It has sent out letters and messages to individual states, really strongly discouraging any sale or use of raw milk within an individual state. They can't mandate it because that's up to the state, and they've asked them to use their regulatory authorities to stop the sales in this concerning period. We don't know a lot yet about cheese that could be made from raw milk. There are some cheeses that use raw milk to make their cheese. It is allowable under certain conditions from the FDA, but right now the FDA has significant concerns until we have data about it. The other thing I would say is, just from my perspective, we've seen, and here's a clip from CBS News, there have been some promoters of raw milk consumption, and they're really promoting more drinking of raw milk. And we know the raw milk has, if it comes from an infected cow, has active virus. And we know that people can get sick from virus when they get it directly from cows. So this is, in my opinion, very crazy kind of advice to be done. So I'm worried about that risk. Next slide. I think I'm nearly done. Thank you.
Great. Well, what a tour de force tonight. I'm going to go back to Keith and ask, should we be worried the World Dairy Expo comes to Madison? Will there be any, risk of us being introduced to the virus in a new way?
I think that's a good question, and Dr. Konkle and I have been talking about it regularly about what will the plan be. Right now, there's requirements for all show cows to be tested, whether they're moving interstate or not. So that will be important. I'm hoping by then we'll have the blood serology test that looks for antibody to be available. So we'll be able to run both, and that will be really helpful, because a cow that responds to the serology test and has been exposed but is no longer shedding is actually exactly the cow you want to be at a show. So, but I think there's a lot of questions on that, but we also have the biosecurity and the testing and the tools to be able to make sure that we can maintain business continuity for shows like World Dairy Expo.
And it should be noted, there's no evidence that this has jumped to badgers, so I guess we're all safe. Is that correct? By the way, just a personal question. I am deep frying turkeys for my extended family this weekend. There's no reason to worry about that, is there? Can I assure them that 3 scientists told me that we can eat deep fried turkey?
As long as you're cooking to the appropriate temperatures, poultry and beef are safe to eat.
We got a little asterisk there. Okay.
Remember, poultry have a high mortality and they're depopulated because of that, and to reduce virus spread. So there shouldn't be any virus positive poultry.
All right, Darlene, earlier you used the terminology presumptive cases. And, this is something that's come up in a lot of different, thinking back to COVID and other things. When you are reporting statistics and you talk about presumptive cases, what does that mean exactly?
Well, the presumptive cases come from the testing that's initially done at the NOLM labs, like Dr. Poulsen described. Those are the definition of those cases that they get a detection is presumptive. We have such a high degree of confidence in our NOLM labs nationally, both states and USDA, that states will act on that information. But when the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Lab would get an initial detection of high-path AI, the H5N1 virus, either in poultry or in cattle, they would send that then on to USDA's National Veterinary Services Lab for confirmation. So that would be the confirmed step.
So a presumptive case, we have tested and gotten a positive indication of the infection. Mm-hmm. It's not just, there were other animals infected at that site, and then other things, something happened and we presume they all had it. It's more specific than that. Mm-hmm. Okay. I just want to make sure of that. On your One Health slide, I get the animal and human health parts very obviously, but when we talk about environmental health factors as it relates to the spread of these infectious diseases involving animals, what are the things that we should be worried about as it relates to environmental health in order to support the whole One Health picture? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think definitely the health of the environment, and you sometimes include wildlife in that definition of environmental health, is really important for all of us to consider, because changes in the environment, whether it's due to climate change or other factors, can affect how animals migrate. They can affect diseases that rely on vectors to transmit, and those vector populations and how they move. The type of habitat animals have can influence how they move or their general health status. And for other diseases that are not related to infectious diseases, there are other environmental factors that could come into play. So it's definitely all connected.
I'm going to go to a question from the audience. MS Putnam, do large flocks of pigeons, doves, starlings visiting cattle feeders contribute to the spread of H5N1?
Actually, USDA is looking at some of that data right now and infected herds in some of the states that have affected cattle herds. They're looking at some of those bird populations that normally would frequent dairy farms. Typically, dairy and poultry farms try to keep those other animals away from their feeders, because at the least they could potentially act as fomites or have the capability to have that virus on their feet or on their feathers and just physically move it from one place to another.
Fomites. We have lay people in the audience. Can you tell me what that is?
Going back to my veterinary school days for defining things, but a fomite is an inanimate object that can, for mostly inanimate, that can transmit a virus or bacteria from one place to another without becoming infected itself. How did I do there, Dr. Poulsen?
Yeah, seeing good examples like a doorknob. You know.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. It sounded more interesting than that.
Yeah.
Or your
Usually,
boots or your hands if
Yeah.
you're at one dairy farm and then you move to another farm, either because you're delivering feed or because you're visiting another farm, your boots or your clothing could act as a fomite.
Got it. Dr. Lucey, what kinds of cheeses are made from raw milk, and what should we be looking out for? I haven't really thought much about that. I'm hoping my Hook's Paradise blue cheese isn't a raw milk cheese.
No, you should look at the label. They will describe it on the label if it comes from raw milk. Many classes of cheese are allowed to be made from raw milk, but they have to age them for 60 days. The idea there historically was that if there was a pathogen present in it and it was held refrigerated for 60 days, that usually these will start to die off or reduce in numbers, because the cheese has acid, it has salt, and it has competitive bacteria. The issue we have right now is we don't have any data about how easy it is for this virus to die off in a cheese and what kind of conditions. So we're hoping to do some work on that. I would say that there are certain cheeses that are not allowed to be made from raw milk because they're just too risky in it itself. The virus will not die off in them and they will grow. So you should look at your label for your cheese. There isn't, most of your standard cheeses that you buy in the store are all made from pasteurized milk. It tends to be some specialized products, some artisan type of products. So we have a small number in the state of Wisconsin that make it from raw milk. So right now, that's a kind of a concern for us to make sure that the milk that they are using is tested, for example. And I know some dairy companies across the US, even if they don't have any declared infections in their state, they're actually sending samples out at the moment to see what's in their milk, and incoming farms, they're being very proactive in it. So it's definitely something we're watching.
And is it found more commonly in certain varietals of cheese that you would use raw milk?
Yes, so there's some of the artisan kind of cheeses, they like to make it from raw milk to give more of a flavor profile or stronger flavor. But you could get a raw milk cheddar, for example, and there are some retail brands that are made from raw milk. But we should kind of inform you that the FDA basically has a yes or no answer for pasteurization. You either hit the minimum temperatures and time that I said there, or it's considered raw. But there are brands that actually do very, very close to this temperature and time, but they don't do the full process for reasons that they think the flavor of the cheese is better. But in all likelihood, knowing what we know about the thermal stability of this virus from eggs, because we know a lot about eggs, because it's been in eggs and poultry for a long time, in all likelihood, those products, although classified as raw, are also going to have a very high level of inactivation of virus as well. So I look at it, there's only some small amount of cheeses that are out there that are made truly from raw and nothing heated from it as well. So there's kind of a class of fully pasteurized stuff that is just below the legal limit. So it's considered legally raw, but it's actually what we call thermized. And then there's stuff that has no heat treatment at all.
Interesting. I hope we can get into the finer gradations of that on our labeling. That would give me some comfort. But question from William Schmitz: how does the virus cross into different species, and wouldn't the body detect it as a foreign body and attack it?
Great question. You want me to start with that, maybe?
Sure.
So every different mammalian species that we've seen are affected differently. Even the different types of birds are affected differently. So our migrating waterfowl, and I think we might be able to kill a couple of questions with one stone here. The difference between the strain that circulated in 2015 and the strain that started circulating in 2022, those waterfowl had a higher mortality rate. So it was even affecting waterfowl differently as a different strain. But the way that our mammals up until January 2024, they were scavenging dead birds, same as our raptor species, like our bald eagles and white snowy owls and such. But so they were eating it. And we know that birds that are viremic have a large amount of virus in their muscle tissue. But those animals didn't just get sick. They got central nervous disease. So they had meningoencephalitis and died from that. So they had a pretty high mortality rate. Very different in dairy cows. And we're pretty confident, we as in science, that there was a point based off the phylogeny of the virus, meaning the fingerprint of the virus, is that we're pretty sure that this was a point source introduction either to a herd or multiple herds in that Texas panhandle. Very different. There isn't a lot of standing water. The water that's out for the cows, there were birds within the water, same as the goat kids in Minnesota. But the different thing is, and this is where I think we need more information, is that the receptor for the flu in the cows, and specifically the reason why cows spread this virus so fast, is that they're shedding it in their milk. And that's why we really only see this in lactating cows. There's very possible younger animals are affected, but they're really not the low-hanging fruit, maybe the top couple of percent. But these cows, as they shed so much milk or virus in their milk into the milking machine, and we kind of already know this too, because beef cows don't have this problem, even in the same geographic locations. So, but we don't milk beef cows. Calves milk beef cows, right? That's the whole point of a brood cow. But we also don't sterilize the milking machine between cattle. So we tend to sanitize the cow before and after for infectious and environmental pathogens. And then the milking machine gets sanitized between milking strings. So like the morning milking and the afternoon milking. So there's a lot of virus in that teat inflation liner, the rubber. It's all over in the parlor. And we're pretty sure that most of the cows are affected through the mammary gland, because many cows are affected without clinical signs. And we really don't see virus other than the udder, with very rare exceptions.
Question from Jim Kennedy: how is this avian flu different from the one that caused a scare several years ago?
And I could start with that one. I'm not exactly sure which strain, but they're a few years ago, 15 years or so ago, back in 2005, 2008, we heard quite a bit about an H5N1 avian influenza virus circulating in China and Southeast Asia. And there was concern at that time that that virus could have been capable of a pandemic potential. Influenza viruses, one of their hallmarks is they mutate fairly consistently and almost say rapidly. So that particular virus still is around, but this H5N1 is different from that one. It's got the same name as far as its hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, but flu viruses do tend to mutate pretty rapidly. And so even this virus, since it entered North America in late 2021 until now, has mutated significantly. We're looking at the same general virus, but its characteristics have changed over time.
And was that earlier virus more lethal and frightening for humans, in your opinion?
I believe that virus that was circulating back in the late 2005, 2008 range did have a higher case fatality rate for people, somewhere in the area of 40 or 50% or higher. And some of those cases of humans that were infected and that potentially died from that virus, they had really close contact with poultry, even in their homes. So they had the potential to get more virus from their close contact with poultry. Mm-hmm. And in this case, so far, with the virus that's circulating in North America, in both poultry and dairy cattle, as I mentioned, there have been 3 cases associated with the dairy cattle farms. We are all watching it very closely, but those cases have been mild. In 2 cases, I think in all 3 cases, conjunctivitis, and then in one of the cases, some respiratory signs in that person as well, and all have recovered.
I realize that this may not be anyone's particular area of expertise, but you're all scientists. I'm sure you pay attention to this more than the rest of us who probably lost interest in COVID a long time ago. But when COVID originally arrived on the scene, there was this notion that it came from some kind of open air market and the kind of cross pollination between different types of animals in this market. What do researchers understand about the origin of COVID-19 today? Is there any sense that we know where it came from, or is it still a bit of a mystery?
Just based off some of the discussions that we've been having in our biosecurity task force on campus, I think the leading hypotheses are still wildlife reservoir, potentially maybe bats moving into and then having a zoonotic infection. There was even a story this week about federal dollars. I was interview with Dr. Fauci about federal dollars going into gain of function research. And I try not to keep up on the conspiracy theories, but I still think it's probably a wildlife reservoir.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just wanted your professional opinion on that. I think, we have another election coming. Maybe it'll be talked about again. Well, yeah. So we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of all of your time, and thank you for joining us tonight. I don't know, maybe we could go around in the order of our remarks, and Darlene, Keith, John, give me a couple takeaways that our audience should keep in mind about this current outbreak of bird flu. What's top of mind for each of you?
Well, I think the One Health concept for me is top of mind. We've developed over the years at Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection great networks and relationships with our colleagues in food safety, in the diagnostic labs with our colleagues in public health and wildlife health and environmental health. And those are all coming into play now while we're working on this virus and keeping a close eye on it and trying to learn from each other.
I always, every time I speak to anyone, I always start with pasteurized dairy products are safe. And right now, the risk to public health is low, but the longer that the virus continues to spread, that risk goes up. And I do think that One Health component, recognizing how complex all of the different needs of the different stakeholders are, and we need to figure out how to be more effective in that while maintaining business continuity, especially for an industry as important as it is to Wisconsin. And it's not just dairy in Wisconsin. When dairy is affected in Texas, dairy in Wisconsin is affected too. So it's important, and there's a lot of people working on it, working very diligently. And then we just need to find that sweet spot between political science and animal science.
Yeah, well said. John Lucey, final word.
Well, I'd like to echo a little bit of what Keith was saying. So I've been involved in looking at the properties of raw milk and pasteurized milk for quite a bit of time, written on it, has reviews in it, and so on, and have testified at various organizations. Despite what the internet and some influencers will tell you, there's no nutritional benefit from drinking raw milk beyond what you would get from pasteurized milk. But it does open up the person who's consuming it to all kinds of regular risks from pathogens. And now in this current environment opens up another potential risk for consuming this virus as well. So my strong urge and recommendation is to avoid consuming raw milk anytime, but especially now until we really understand this. And my hope is that the raw milk cheeses, we'll figure out whether there's any risk in those to the small number of mostly farmstead artisans, a few of them will use that we'll find out if they are at risk as well. We don't know that for sure yet, but in the absence of data, we should be cautious.
Well, great words of wisdom. Really appreciate all of you taking the time to unpack this issue for us tonight. We're fortunate to have such a strong group of people affiliated with UW to speak on this subject. So thanks for joining us tonight.
On Wisconsin.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And congratulations to the dairy science teams down in Florida. Thanks for being with us again tonight, as always. We look forward to seeing you next month when we'll have another exciting topic queued up for you, timely and important as always. And in the meantime, thanks for watching and on Wisconsin.
In 1848, just 2 months after the creation of our beloved state, a great university was born, the University of Wisconsin, to serve, educate, and benefit people from every corner of Wisconsin and beyond. And for 175 years, we have pushed forward, energizing dreams and igniting innovation. With educational opportunities that create promise and research that improves lives, UW-Madison is a place where an idea can change the world. And as we look forward, we also look back to stand up for what's right, build common bonds, and a better future. When combined with inspired goofiness and Badger spirit, there's an inspirational and unconventional vibe that's all Madison. It's more than just fun and games, though. At the UW, we go from brainstorms to breakthroughs, from today's students to tomorrow's leaders. This is where an idea can change the world, the whole world, a corner of the world, my world, our world. UW-Madison's profound eurekas and personal ahas transform us all and serve the greater good. As proud Badgers, we celebrate the last 175 years and the next as the UW charges forward. On Wisconsin.